Today we want to have lesson number 2 in regard to courtship. And we're going to talk about 7 different steps that lead up to marriage. Before we look at the first step, we want to point out that the way in which most courtships are carried on today, it is a very painful process. In the book Adventist Home, page 57, it says, "To trifle with hearts is a crime of no small magnitude in the sight of a holy God. And yet some will show their preference for young ladies and call out their affections and then go their way and forget all about the words they have spoken and their effect. A new face attracts them, and they repeat these same words, devote to another the same attention." How often in the dating process, this is what happens. And what it does is it damages the emotions of the other party. Well, both parties really. But, marriage works best when you can fully trust yourself to someone else and believe that they are going to be faithful to you and that they really love you. And so when we go out with this one and say really endearing things to them, and then we leave them and go to someone else, and then maybe 4 or 5 people do that, it begins to seal up the emotions to where it makes it hard for a person to allow themselves to really love somebody. But also there's another downside. It says this disposition will reveal itself in the married life. The marriage relation does not always make the fickle mind firm, the wavering steadfast, and true to principle. They tire of constancy, and unholy thoughts will manifest themselves in unholy actions. So if we date this one and the other one and another one, and the idea is presented that, well, that's the best way to find the right one for you. But actually what we're doing is training ourselves to enjoy change. And so when we get interested in one enough to want to marry them, then after a while we want change. And we get to thinking about someone else. And then if we're not really grounded by religious principle, we may get involved with them. It's actually gotten to the place where it is generally believed that having affairs is okay. You stay married, but you have an affair. And that's probably, again, the result of getting used to change. So the plan that we're going to study does not recommend sampling many individuals to find out which one is best for you. Another interesting statement from Adventist Home, page 53, says the unwise, unsanctified courtship and marriages cannot fail to result in bickerings, in strife, in alienations, in indulgence of unbridled passions, in unfaithfulness of husbands and wives, unwillingness to restrain the self-willed inordinate desires, and in indifference to the things of eternal interest. So here's kind of a list of many of the pitfalls of relationships today. We get married because we have been involved in the physical part and we feel that we really love each other. But when we settle down to marriage and we're not as compatible, then it develops many arguments, calls them bickerings here, strife, and alienations. And then a wall gets built up between us, and at some point we decide we really don't love each other anymore. Another thing that can be hidden under the marriage relationship is an improper sexual conduct, either in what is done or in too frequent, and this is called the unbridled passions. And then it tells us again about the unfaithfulness, that someone else attracts the attention. And then the worst of all is that it develops a lack of interest and indifference to eternal realities. Because a marriage without God, there are cases where it does work, but they are rare, and we have a much better chance in marriage if we have a relationship with God. And the third one, by way of introductory thoughts from Adventist Home, page 49, let every step toward a marriage alliance be characterized by modesty, simplicity, sincerity, and an earnest purpose to please and honor God. So in the kind of courtship that we carry on, we need those three qualities. Number one, modesty, and that's particularly addressing not taking physical liberties that don't belong during the courtship period, but to conduct ourselves in a high level of Christian conduct. And simplicity actually means to allow the other person to see who we really are. I don't mean by that we should manifest all of our evil natures so they can see it, but to not make an attempted effort to be able to impress the other person with, our good side and do our best to hide the other things. And after all, the best time for them to decide whether they feel they can live with these situations is before marriage, because it's not really fair afterward, when they didn't even know we had that characteristic, to ask them to live with us, till death do us part. So we want to be ourselves and allow the other person to see us as we really are. Another dimension is that we invite them to question those that know us best, and so that they can really acquaint themselves with what we're like. If they will marry us knowing what we're like, that builds a good foundation for the marriage to last. And sincerity is a little different aspect, but very similar idea, that we are not making believe that we care about them, but we are telling them the reality of what's going on with us. And of course, above all these, we need to be trying our best to please God and to not enter into anything that would be displeasing to him. So now we start to look at step number 1. Step number 1 is faithfulness to duty in a parental home. Now, if you've already gotten past that and you're already courting someone, you still can evaluate yourself on the first step that you should have taken. And in the first one, we discover this thought from a book called Messages to Young People, page 466. It is by faithfulness to duty in the parental home that the youth are to prepare themselves for homes of their own. Now, the sad part is that many young people who have flunked their home life, in other words, they rebelled against their parents, they didn't get along with others in the home, and maybe they decided to leave home early because home was very distasteful. Well, they don't stop to realize, but they are most likely to relate to their own home in exactly the way that they related to their parental home. So, we need to develop the right habits in our parental home. And it gives a few of them here. It says, let them here practice self-denial. In other words, do we always have to have our own way? Do other people have to bend to us? Or can we give up what we would like because somebody else would like something different? And taking some of our time to benefit others. For instance, to help lift the burdens of the home rather than just being waited on. So there's lots of ways to practice self-denial in the home, and that will be a great benefit when we have a home of our own. Also it says, and manifest kindness, courtesy, and Christian sympathy. Here are qualities that really help love to grow. And the best way to learn them is in our parental home, or if we didn't have parents, in whosever home we lived, or even the dormitory, whatever situation we lived in where we had to relate with other people, that is the opportunity that we have to manifest kindness, courtesy, and Christian sympathy. For instance, if you notice that someone else is sad, that you talk to them and try to find if there is no way that you can help them to be happy again. When we live really close to each other, we can see a lot of things and change some of them. We can't change them all, but we can at least try. If we develop those kind of habits, then we will manifest them in our own home as well. In writing to an orphan boy who didn't have his own home to learn those things in, here's some good advice. 2 Testimonies, page 308 and 9. Wise is that young man and highly blessed who feels it to be his study if he has parents to look up to them, and if he has not, who regards his guardian or those with whom he lives as counselors, as comforters, and in some respects, as his rulers. Now, God doesn't give anyone the right to rule us in everything, but there are some things that whoever's in charge of the home has the privilege and the right of ruling. And so how a person relates to authority and how a person relates to counsel and to have their involvement in our life. How we relate to that is developing habits of how we will relate to it in our own home. And who allow the restraints of his home to abide upon him. Then she gives him some personal advice, because apparently he wasn't doing real well. You consider it beneath you to do duties about the house chores and little errands. Now this reminds me of a young man that came to live in our home many years ago. His father had passed away and he had to become the man of the home. And so he learned to really pay attention to his mother's needs, to lift her burdens. And of all the people that have lived in our home, he was the one that I consider the best example. You didn't even have to tell him what needed done. He would notice if the dishes needed to be washed, the garbage needed to be carried out, if the floor needed to be swept. Whatever duties around the home are often ignored, or maybe the one in charge tries to get us to do it and we don't even want to do it. We find ways to get out of it, or just make it, just ignore their request. You see, those are things that develop habits. And I remember saying to my wife, the wife that gets that young man will be really blessed. Goes on, you have a positive dislike for these little requirements, but you should cultivate a love for these very things which you are so adverse. Until you do this, you will not be acceptable help anywhere. When engaged in these necessary small things, you are doing more real service than when engaged in large business and laborious work. And I suppose the reason for that is that these kind of chores are ones that most people would rather not have to do, and yet they are so valuable. Who would want to live in a home that never got cleaned, or where the garbage never got carried out, or the dishes never got washed? And so they, even though they're not the most exciting jobs to do, those that will develop a character to be willing to do it become really good partners. I have a case in mind now of one who was presented before me in vision, who neglected these little things and could not interest himself in small duties, seeking to lighten the work of those indoors. It was too small business. He now has a family, but he still possesses the same unwillingness to engage in these small yet important duties. The result is great care rests upon his wife. She has to do many things or they will be left undone. And the amount of care which comes upon her because of her husband's lack is breaking her constitution. So he's totally oblivious to this, but he's actually destroying the health of his wife because of the burden that he's placing upon her. And she apparently is a hard worker. She's doing the extra duties, but sooner or later she's going to get sick, which will cost money and various other inconveniences. Now this one is about a man that hasn't learned to be faithful in the home, but it can be the other way. I have seen husbands that had to do way too much in the home because the wife didn't want to do it. But either way, it brings stresses on the marriage that it will be a surprise if that marriage can last. it finishes by saying he cannot now overcome this evil as easily as he could in his youth. However, if you're older and you didn't win that battle and you didn't conquer that, the sooner the better, because as you get older, the older you get, the harder it is. So wherever you are, if you need to break that habit, it's important to start. He neglects the little duties and fails to keep everything up tidy and nice. And so the home looks messy unless his wife will do the work to make sure it's tidy. These are just a few things that really can best be learned in the parental home or in somebody's home where we relate close with a group of people. And that's the best, but wherever we are, we can learn those things and improve so that we become a really good marriage partner. Next time, we'll look at step number 2.